All right, we're back. Part 2, episode 27 of ZK Live. We've been talking about hiring. We've been talking about that mahogany project. What else? We've been talking about other things as well. I want to talk a little bit about the post I just made a minute ago about caulking the underneaths of clapboards. I will tell you that I vividly remember the first time. I remember when I learned that you were not supposed to caulk the underneaths of clapboards. And I learned the hard way. Very, very hard way. So we were on at the time, and it was for probably a long time, one of the highest end projects. I mean, it was a multi-million-dollar, unbelievable home. Early in my career, working for my dad, actually. He had a company for a couple of years. It was a complete failure, but we tried really hard. We were on a project, and they had a clapboard. They had an arch above their garage door, and they had clapboard within the arch, right? And the paint had peeled on it. Or no, maybe we were just repainting it. I think we were just repainting it, maybe. And I was always insanely detail-oriented. And I caulked the underneaths of the clapboards. I caulked the curve. I caulked everything. I made it freaking seamless. And then I painted it, and it looked so good. But it probably rained. It had rain. They had moisture issues with this house anyway. So we were then we did the inside of the house, and it was a big project. And somehow we were there long enough or at least, I don't remember how it went, but we got the call back, whether it was before we left but that paint failed. I mean, within 6 months, I would say probably in like 2 months it failed. I probably locked in a bunch of moisture after a rain and had nowhere to go. So, and it all failed. And I remember at the time just being like, it doesn't make any sense. I caulked and thinking I didn't caulk it well enough. Like, I honestly thought the reason the paint failed was because I didn't caulk it well enough. And then I don't know if even then I realized that what I did wrong. But I learned it somewhere along the line. That's when you go and work for people. I had never worked for a real paint contractor before. And then I went and worked for a real paint contractor. And then I came back and then I started my own company. And I got my biggest job to date. This was probably 5-6 years ago. It was a real estate agency. And it was a commercial building right on the main street in a really nice town. And the place had been repainted 3 times in 8 years. And because the paint kept peeling. And so they called me in, and I got the contract to repaint the place. And, I had some peeling paint, but it didn't look terrible. The peeling paint wasn't bad enough. So I gave him a price. We book it. Well, we went to when we power washed this building, everything changed. So what happened was, we power washed it, and you see it's all shiny now, right? With the water's all over it. Well, the paint was not attached to the building anymore. The paint film was solid, but it was not attached to the wood anymore. So the water was getting behind it, and it was like pooling behind the paint. So in the light, you could see these like bubbles of water that were behind the paint because we had washed the place so well. Now all of a sudden there was all this moisture in, and it became very clear there was a huge paint failure problem on this project that you couldn't see until you washed the place. It was insane. So, did a little homework, and very quickly that's when we figured out, and I don't know, I had already learned it, I guess, ahead of time. We learned that they had caulked the underneaths of every clapboard on this whole place. And not just a little bit of caulking. They so thoroughly caulked this building. And that was why it had been failing over and over and over again and being repainted every 2 years. So I had the bad news of saying, like, hey, I can repaint this, but it's going to fail again. What we need to do here is we need to sand every ounce of paint off of the siding on this building. We took Makita drills, grinder things. They have the hard metal discs. And we took those up underneath, and we were able to grind out the underneath. We were to put that disc up underneath the clapboards in order to grind out the caulking. And we spent weeks. At the time, they got a huge deal. I probably charged them an extra $10,000. I want to say it was like less than $10,000 more to strip this whole building. I mean, I lost my shirt. I should have, obviously I would have charged a lot more today. But we were out there in the sun for a couple weeks, grinding every ounce of paint off this place and all the caulking out from underneath. So I was driving home from work yesterday, back from the shop, and I was driving down the road. It's like slow. It's a like little neighborhood on the east side of Providence by my house. And I see a guy with like a rag. He's on a ladder and he's got a rag, and he seems to be like wiping the whole clapboard. Like it looks kind of whitish, and he seems to be wiping the whole clapboard. And I'm like, it just like caught my eye as I drove by, because I'm, obviously you drive by any job site and you're watching everything, but I already had to go slow, so I was able to see more. So, but he had like, he had caulked the underneaths, and then he had like wiped the whole thing, and it made such a mess that he was wiping all the white off of all the clapboards. And I did 2 loops. So I turned around, I drove back past it, and I was like, I had this like gut feeling. It was just weird. I saw just a little bit of like a lot of wiping for caulking, for like, what is he doing in the middle of these stretches? And so I was like, I just had this gut reaction. So I turned around. I like drive by even slower now, and I'm like, yep, he's caulking, because I didn't know if he was caulking or not. So I was like, oh yeah, there's the caulk tube hanging from the ladder. He's caulking. Now I'm pretty sure he's caulking the underneath of it. So I turn around again to go back and be like, and because I'm just the old 2 years ago, a year ago, 100% I'm stopping and I'm telling this man, you shouldn't be caulking underneath of this, and here's why. Right? That was just me. I've learned to. I'm much better. I'm still the guy who'll tell people stuff when they don't ask, all the time. But this one was just one of these cases where, like, I don't know. Oh, I turned around and I was like, okay, I was like, I can't help it. I'm going to go tell this guy. I turned around again. By that time, he had come down his ladder, and he was, like, walking down the street, and there's a tree in the way, and I was just kind of like, it was enough to make me stop. And I don't know if I'm glad or not I did, because I don't know how the guy's going to take it. He was a carpenter. He seemed to have a nice truck and a nice trailer. But he was probably 50 plus, and I know he was trying to do a really good job. So today, before this show, I stopped by the job, and sure enough, he's thoroughly caulked the underneath of every clapboard. He replaced a bunch of clapboards on it, and I'm sure it failed because it wasn't breathing. But now it's definitely not going to breathe. So even if no water gets in his tops and his sides, right? Generally, probably water's going to fail on one of those sides where the clapboards meet the trim. But say that doesn't happen. No water gets in. I now understand from listening to enough building science stuff that the house is going to have moisture come from it and push out. So even if you stop the water from outside getting in, the moisture in the air from the inside will eventually find its way out. So that wood's going to get wet. And guess what? I can tell you right now, the paint on that house is going to fail, because he's sealed it up so airtight that when any bit of water comes in, that water's going to come into the wood. The wood's going to get wet. Now the sun's going to beam down. And it's going to hit that wood. The water's going to heat up. It's going to want to push out and get out and evaporate, and it's going to push through the paint. And you're going to have little tiny micro cracks in the paint. Well, now that's going to add more water is going to come in now. Now it's going to, and it accelerates it. And the next thing you know, the whole place will be peeling. And hopefully that post I made today will save one paint job. What an insane thing. I care about paint jobs, but maybe it'll save one paint job, one house from being peeling, and I show up and go, okay, it's thousands of dollars now to remove all the paint from your house, grind out all the caulking from underneath, and start from scratch. That's my little rant. So if you guys want to share my post and help educate somebody else, I'm sure someone will see it and be like, oh, actually, I'm not going to say who on either end, but someone did send me, they had screenshotted this, so they saw it. There was a painter who put a poll up, I don't know when, and he said, do you caulk the underneaths of, I'm saying, do you caulk the underneaths of clapboards? Yes or no? And 73% of people said yes. And he said, good to see painters doing it the right way. I'm not even going to send that person a message, because I just don't, I'm not there anymore. Now I'm going to put good stuff out into the ether, but I'm not going to go bother people. But needless to say, 73% of people said that they caulk the underneaths of clapboards. That scares me. I was one of them at one point before I knew any better. And we all are. We all don't know something, and then we know something. And so hopefully a couple people will hear that and learn. Chroma Painting asked a question, 2K Poly question. Looking to test this for cabinets. Any advice for first time? Have used lacquer and latex and want to up my game with a more premium option. Yes, I have advice. My advice is practice, obviously. I know a lot of guys are using like shellac. We use shellac for a long time. I would recommend a 2-part system from start to finish, if possible. And I mean, it is possible. So our cabinet process is 2-part isolator. So it's like glue, it just sticks to anything, and it's an isolating coat. It's gonna stick to everything. It's 2-part, and it's gonna create great adhesion. Great adhesion. So much better than bin shellac. So we're starting with a 2-part isolator. It's going to give us adhesion. Then we are using, in most cases, we're going to use a 2-part primer for build. Then we'll sand that down, and then we'll apply our 2-part polyurethane. The rule of thumb in coatings is never apply hard over soft, right? You don't want to put a candy shell over Jell-O, right? If you have softer coating here, a non-enamel maybe, or a 1-part product that's not super hard, and it's sort of soft and moves, and then you have a very, very hard shell over the top. Well, that's going to cause accelerated chipping, right? Because you've just put a hard coating over a soft coating. So generally you don't want to put hard over soft. And so 1-part products will always be softer than 2-part products, right? They can exist in a gallon all by themselves, and they air dry to dry. A 2-part product is a chemical curing process. It's just going to be harder. They can't exist together for long. There's a pot life to them. There's a in this case, a polyurethane has a polymer bond that is like this, right? And it's not going to let go, and it's going to be very hard and scratch resistant and durable. But if you put this really hard scratch resistant durable coating, right, over a bunch of Jell-O, and then you punch it, crack, right? You've now punctured your beautiful coating because you put hard over soft. I would be careful about that, and I would just go with a 2-part system all the way. I wish I had done that from the start. We've switched going forward, so. Paints. John said the 2K sprays like water base, but there's a speck of dust on it. It will show through the finish. Clean, clean, clean. Yeah, so when we sand, we definitely sand minimum, I would say, 400 grit. Very, very meticulously 400 grit sanding before final coat. 320 scratches have shown through the 2K polys. You have to be very vigilant with your sanding to not leave scratches behind between coats before final. Here's an awesome part about 2-part polyurethanes. 2K polys dry really hard, and they cure really fast. If you put a UV light on them, they'll cure in like 30 minutes. Cure! That's crazy. Put a UV light on them for 30 minutes, cured. Now, there's huge advantages to this, right? We're not used to this as painters. The first 2K poly job I ever did, I sprayed the island, and then we sprayed the rest of the cabinets white. And there was an end panel to the fridge that set up higher than the countertop. So you saw it right at eye level. The next morning we showed up, and there was like a subtle sag, just a little one. And I was just like, it was so flawless. The client would have never seen it. It was in white 20 sheen. Like the kitchen was beautiful, but there was a sag. Well, I happen to I can't remember now why, but I happen to have high grit sandpaper in my truck. I think I was experimenting with buffing at the time. So I had high grit sandpaper in my truck. And literally, it was so new to us that I ended up mixing up the 2-part product, put it in the cup gun, the turbine gun, and I was ready to respray that panel. And it was going to set us back a little bit, but I was ready to respray it, so much as so that I mixed the paint. And at the last minute, I was like, well, let me just try something. And I'm going to butcher the grits, but I want to say I started with like 600 grit. And I probably did wet sand in this case. Maybe I didn't. 600 or 800 grit. I sanded the sag off with 600 or 800 grit. And then I sanded it with like 1,000, 1,200, and 1,500. I sanded like the whole panel with 1,500 after. And it was flawless. You could not tell there was ever a sag, and you would never know that I sanded it at all. I buffed it up to a 20 sheen. It was unbelievable. So, a couple tips. When you're spraying anything, ever, I think, you should always have a foam roller, dry foam roller, handy in case you do get a sag. Because it's much easier to roll that out, especially if it's not final coat. And even if it is. You roll out that sag or that drip, and then when you go back later, it sands out really fast and you're smooth again. Versus trying to sand out a whole sag. Especially in slow drying coatings when most of them won't sand out perfectly flat again because they're soft. But when you do get a sag in a 2K poly situation, you can buff that out in certain situations because of how hard the paint is. Let's see, I missed some stuff. Sorry. Sanding higher than 400 grit is pointless if you are recoating. Yeah, I mean, I didn't say, we said 400. Yeah, sand to 400. You don't need to sand higher than 400, but if you sand to, like, I think with the 2K polys, we always sand to 400 because I've seen the 320 scratches come through. No, I'm able to buff to an exact sheen. So there was 0 difference in sheen. So I know how to buff to 22 degree sheen, 27 degree sheen, 33 degree sheen, you name it, I can buff to that exact sheen. Super thankful to everyone for the input. You got it, Chroma. We had a new question come in. Where is it? Doesn't it like put, oh, here you go. How do you find staff who are committed to your goals? I was being facetious, paint finisher. I find staff who are committed to my goals by having clear goals, first of all, and then by having lots of options, right? Again, because you have to have lots of people to pick from, and so then you communicate those goals to your potential hires. It's like I'm trying to build a company where everyone's pulling in the same direction. It's company culture, like John said, culture, baby. There are many books that have been written on building company culture. A lot of, there's a word, I'm blanking. There's been a lot of hot air probably blown about company culture, and a lot of people blow hot smoke about company culture. It's a real thing, and it's really important. It's what drives what's happening when nobody's looking, and it comes from consistency, in my experience. Company culture is built by consistently saying the same things and doing the same things, and not one day going left and one day going right and one day going left. And like, well, we don't know. Do we go left or do we go right at this turn? I don't even know. Sometimes he goes left and sometimes he goes right. Consistency of decision making, consistency of goals, of company core values, like staying consistent and always preaching the same message all the time will attract people who are into that, and it will push away people who are not. It's when you start to like be a little bit here and a little bit there, that you start to lose that consistency, and then people don't know, and people want to know where they stand. Yes, I think building company culture is crucial if you want to grow at all. If you're not going to watch every painter paint everything all the time, you have to. Culture will affect your company then. If you're going to literally watch every single thing all the time, well, culture will still affect your company, because when the guys aren't there, right, when they're thinking about coming to work, right? So do you get more call-outs when your company culture sucks? Absolutely, right? When your company culture is strong, everyone's pulling in the same direction, trying to get the project done on time, right? When your company culture is strong, people might come in on Saturday to help finish a job on a deadline, right? So company culture affects so many things. And I'm trying to build it and nurture it, and I'm not perfect, and I fail. And even when I talk about it, I can think of things that I wish I was doing better. But if it's not on your radar to try to do better, you're just going to keep struggling to find. I mean, I just kept struggling to find quality human beings that would do we're doing super high quality work, and I don't have to be there to babysit. Somebody, I'm not going to say who, they know who they are, made a story not long ago talking about babysitting their employees. I think that is a huge mistake. I would never, even if I thought I was in some level, which I don't, even if I thought I was babysitting them, I would never verbalize in a way to them or to me. I would not want to think it or verbalize the words babysitting my employees. That is so condescending. It's not enabling. It's not facilitating greatness from your people. If someone comes and says they're babysitting you when you make a mistake, are you going to be looking to get better for next time? No, you're going to be like, well, I'm just a kid, and you babysit me. That's a horrible mentality, I believe, of saying I'm going to babysit my people. How about this? I'm going to babysit my helper. Oh, you want to have some failures in business. I would say, talk about having to babysit your helper and see how that works out for you. I bet you there's no successful business owners who are babysitting their painter helper, their helpers. That's so condescending. It's like asking someone to fail and to make mistakes by saying, calling them a helper. We've already gone over that. Call them an apprentice. Call them something that's not painter's helper. That's so demeaning. No one wants to tell their friends they're a painter's helper. That's a ridiculous thing to say. It's a ridiculous thing to think. But the term babysitting somebody is so demeaning, and it's not empowering. And so what do I want as a business owner? I want my employees to do great things when I'm not around. Well, if I say I'm babysitting them, is that going to help them be awesome when I'm not around? No. When you have a babysitter, you do whatever the heck you want. The babysitter's there to make sure you don't get in trouble. I don't know how I got on that topic, but yeah. Oh yeah. That's mindset. I could not believe more strongly in how important mindset is. And a younger version of myself would have laughed at those concepts. But mindset is everything. How you see the same situation can vastly change the way that you act, right? So if I see somebody do something that's not right, I can say, oh, I got to go babysit my guys. They're over there making mistakes. Or I can say, I'm going to go teach my employees how to be better. Or I'm going to go try to educate my employee, right? That's very different than saying I'm going to babysit them, right? That's empowering someone. When you've been taught, eventually you learn, and then you do better. When you've been babysitting, you just have to do whatever the heck you want all the time. I think, and I know what he meant when he was saying babysitting, but my point is, the words you use are so important. The mindset that you have, even him, the person, it's like, if you're thinking like you're babysitting, you're not thinking like a facilitator, like an owner, like someone who's trying to get great things out of somebody. If that's not a big picture mindset to think of your employees like you're babysitting them. And so, even though I know what he was talking about, I let him know my thoughts on, and I would never have thought that maybe a long time ago. But now I really am. I believe in like mindset and terminology are very important. For what it's worth. Let's see, we had a new question come in, but I can't find it. Where'd it go? Oh. Here it is. This is a good one. Oh, man. Oh, somebody made a comment like, nice clothes on the babysitting. And then somebody asked a new question, and I'm like continuing to go. That's kind of that's me in a nutshell. My brain just keeps going. But we're working on moderation, so we're going to end at 2 hours always. That's the rule. At least on the Q&As. David Andriozzi, the architect, is coming back on. I think in 2 weeks. We had so much fun, and we just scratched the surface of like design and architecture and high-end custom homes that we talked, and we're going to have him go the other way. Jake said the other side of the coin is way shinier when you're not babysitting. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what it is. The behaviors can be the same-ish, but the terminology and the mindset when they're not babysitting and they're facilitating or educating or teaching end up with a much better result later. That's the company culture stuff. If you're building a company where you babysit your employees, that's going to be a culture that no one's going to want to come work for. No, I'm going to put it up right now. Sorry, I took it down because I got distracted. Here we go. Oh, wait, that's a new question. We're going to put that up after. The question was, where is it? How do you paint a wall that was previously covered in wallpaper? The first step is get all that wallpaper off, get the glue off to the best of your ability. We use like warm water and diff, and then warm water in a rag and in a sponge, and like rinse and repeat until the wall doesn't feel sticky anymore and all that glue is gone. Once you've got everything off, we oil prime always. I mean, I think that's a very important. Water-based primer on glue is going to be an issue. So if any little remnants of glue left behind from the wallpaper, if you put a water-based primer or water-based top coat over the top of it, you're taking a huge risk. I would never do that. Best practice is definitely using oil-based primer over that surface in case there is any remnants of glue left behind. And then generally, I would say, most of the time when you're doing this, you're going to end up having to go back and patch. The walls won't be perfectly smooth and ready for paint after you remove the wallpaper. It just rarely does that work. So then you're going to patch. You're patching over your oil primer, and then if you want to use water-based primer over the top of your patch, great. But what touches the surface that had a bunch of glue on it, shellac is probably fine, honestly. But I generally rolling out shellac versus rolling out oil-based primer is probably a little more difficult, and the smells are harsher, faster. I don't know. I'm sure I've never put shellac over old wallpaper. We always use oil-based primer, but shellac has great adhesion qualities. So and it's great as far as I think they call it a universal primer, a universal solvent, where anything will top coat over shellac. So I think you'd probably be good with it. Guards is shellac, correct? It's just been relabeled, I think. But guards, I believe, is shellac, I think. But correct me if I'm wrong. I'd love to know. Let's see. Someone else ask a question. Where? Oh, I put it up. Something about doors. Wow, it just, oh, here we go. Any tips to sand old doors? Depends on what you're trying to sand them to. let's see, where do I start with this? Tips to sanding old doors are, so on all the details, I have a way of folding sandpaper that I really like for sanding details on panels. For me, when you're sanding the detail on a panel, you're really caring about maybe an inch worth of sandpaper, right? And you want a real nice sharp edge and about an inch worth of sandpaper. So if you have a big square trifold piece of sandpaper, you're only using that like little 2 inches, a little inch of sandpaper when you're doing the details, right? So rather than have a big piece of sandpaper folded up into threes that's like this big to sand your little details, what I do is I cut like squares that are probably this big, and I try to make them longer actually, like this, and then I trifold a piece that's about this size, right? So it ends up being like this big, right? It's like 2 inches wide maybe, and it's tri-folded up. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you open it up, five nice edges that are long and narrow. So I can put my hands like this, and I can sand back and forth on all the details, right? It's so much easier to control that piece of paper when it's tri-folded, right? We love the trifold because it's not going to, like, if you fold it over in half and you try to go back and forth, the paper is going to go like this. But when you tri-fold it, it doesn't do that as much. Love the purple sandpaper sheets because it has some adhesive quality to it. They stick together. But I make these little, like, I would say they look like this, and then they fold down and trifold to be like this. And then you can hold them in your fingers and sand back and forth like that. Otherwise, then I would say use an random orbit sander to sand all the flats. That's my tip for sanding old doors. Driving home from a job site on Sunday night, man. I've been there. I'm sorry. What are you going to do next time so you don't have to do that? That's what I always think. Like, what can I do so I don't have to do this again? Guards is water-based? I don't know if I've ever actually used guards. I know people have used lots like guards and use it a lot. I've not. Let's see. Maybe I should just wrap it up. Oh, my friend that's not a painter. Just for him, I'm going to put this insane, ridiculous question up. He thinks he's really funny. What's your opinion of the Paintorama 2600? The Paintorama 2600. You know, I really like the 2400 Paintorama a little bit better. The specs on it, you know, it required 12 amps instead of 13 amps of power. You know, it was a little bit quieter. You know, there's no such thing as a Paintorama 2600, Dino. Okay. Oh, voluntary OT. I can't hate it, man. If you're trying to grind and make that extra money, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as it's optional and not something you had to do because you made a mistake. And we all do that. It's just like, what are you going to do to not make that mistake next time? That's what I'm always trying to think. Okay, this is a great question. The Cutting Edge Painter said, what do you think is the easiest / best grain filler for oak cabinets? And here's my answer. Throw the cabinets away and buy new cabinets. Doors, that is. First of all, first step. It is far, far cheaper in 99.9% of occasions to buy new cabinet doors than it is to fill the wood grain on oak cabinet doors. That is a loser's game. I promise. Do the math. Any way, shape, or form. It's never going to work out. I know that there's a tendency for painters to be painters, right? But it's like, look, you have oak doors. There's so many companies now that will make cabinet doors, and they come smooth. It's like, why would you ever spend? I mean, so the last thing I did that was oak was that pool table that we did. We did a high gloss oak pool table. That pool table was almost $10,000 to paint the pool table. The oak graining in that table was so deep. We sanded off the old coating. We used Isolante, 2-part solvent-based Isolante. I think we applied 3 coats of polyester primer, hot, like the no joke, real deal polyester primer. 3 coats of that, sanded that down, still had graining. I think we did more 2K solvent primer over the top of that, sanded that down. What a nightmare. If any way possible, so Nick Slavik I love Nick Slavik's take on this. He doesn't fill the wood grain, he calls it something. Oh man. He doesn't, or maybe he says he fills the grain, but he doesn't make it smooth. What he essentially said, like he'll take a mini roller, they'll spray and like mini roll a coat of oil primer into the grain. So at least it fills it as far as like there's no shadows. I think there's one way of doing it, and it's like, okay, God, he has a term for it. If somebody knows it, say it. But if and when we have clients that have oak doors, which I don't think I've done an oak kitchen cabinet job, but if I did, what I would say is like we can like do a light filling, which is like we're just going to manually roll in the first coat of primer so it fills the shadow lines. Because, you know, if you spray oak, it doesn't fill in the grain, so there's no shadow lines. So we back roll the primer in. Yeah, I've used some Timbermate putty before, but you'll still see the wood grain afterwards, but it won't have the shadow marks. That's an acceptable. That's what Nick's standard is for what he's doing. Most people, that's going to be great. If they truly don't want to see wood grain, though, yeah, just buy new doors. There's many places that sell new doors. Don't try to fill oak grain in cabinet doors. That is, you are doing your client a great disservice, or you're doing yourself, one or the other. If you're charging accordingly to fill oak grain in cabinet doors, you are massively taking advantage of your client, and that you are not a good value in the market, and you should be telling them to buy doors. And if you are filling wood grain on oak and you're not charging accordingly, you are taking it on the chin. You are losing a ton of money, and you should stop doing it so that you can eat and have more money. Everybody, thanks for watching the Q&A. It was good. John's going to be on Tuesday. Everybody save up all your questions. All your embarrassing stories about John, make sure to save those up too, and give us all the dirt on him. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to nerd out about painting. Yeah, everybody have a great night. Go out Monday and crush it. See you later, guys.